my friends, is often treated as a curse in the modern imagination. We avoid it. We despise it. We think it is proof of failure, of weakness, of not belonging. Yet I tell you, there is a secret in loneliness that few dare to encounter. There is a strange alchemical fire hidden within the silent hours when no one calls your name. When you walk through the streets unseen, when you lie in your bed and the ceiling above feels like a mirror of your isolation, those moments that feel like exile are in fact the threshold to a deeper kingdom, where the self speaks, where the unconscious reveals its contours, and where the archetype of the wanderer awakens in its true form. You who are empaths, who feel too much, who absorb the sorrows of others like a sponge, who sense the invisible tremors in the atmosphere of a room, you know already that loneliness stalks you. For in giving, in absorbing, in healing others, you have also carried a secret wound, the wound of never quite being seen in your own depths. People love the light that emanates from you, but few comprehend the cost. And so, like exiled prophets, you often retreat, whether by necessity or by fate, into solitude. At first you resist it, you struggle, you fear it, yet slowly, in the stillness, you begin to taste another truth, that loneliness is not the enemy, but the crucible. In myth we find this over and over again. The shaman must retreat into the forest, into the cave, where his flesh is torn by spirits, where he encounters demons and ancestors alike. Christ himself wandered into the desert for 40 days. Moses climbed Sinai alone. The Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree while the world forgot him. In every culture, Individuation, rarest solitude. Why should it be different for you, who feel the wounds of the world? Your loneliness is not merely a misfortune of modern alienation. It is a psychological rite of passage written into the fabric of the soul. When I studied the unconscious, I discovered that it is not a void, but a living reality, an infinite field of images, archetypes, and forces that shape us without our knowing. To meet the unconscious requires courage. It requires a turning inward, a silence from external noise, so that the whispers of the soul can be heard. Empaths in particular are drawn outward, compelled to attend to others, to heal, to soothe, but their individuation cannot happen unless they are forced back into themselves, into the solitude that strips away projections. That is why loneliness visits them again and again, not as punishment, but as summons. Consider the archetype of the hermit. In tarot imagery, he holds the lantern in the dark, searching not for others but for truth itself. The hermit is often misunderstood as barren or useless, yet the lantern he carries is lit by the inner flame, and without his solitary path, the collective would remain blind. Empaths, when exiled into loneliness, are drawn into this hermit archetype. They are stripped of their role as givers, stripped of the comfort of being needed, and forced to see themselves naked, un adornet, without function. In that nakedness lies terror, but also liberation. Loneliness is the arena where projection dissolves. We cannot hide in another's arms. We cannot cover our face with the mask of being indispensable. We cannot lose ourselves in the dramas of others. alone, the empath meets their own shadow, the rage long suppressed, the sorrow never voiced, the selfishness denied, the longing for recognition. It is bitter medicine. Yet only through drinking it does the transformation occur. In alchemy, they spoke of the nigredo, the blackening, the rotting stage where the matter decomposes. Loneliness is your nigredo. It is the putrefaction of all your illusions about who you are through the eyes of others. And it is precisely here that the rare strength emerges, a strength that cannot be obtained by constant company or applause. I have listened to many dreams in my life. In the dreams of empaths, I often found images of vast empty landscapes, deserts, oceans, frozen fields. The dreamer would walk alone, sometimes terrified, sometimes carrying a candle or a torch. Sometimes they would encounter a shadowy figure who seemed threatening but also strangely familiar. These dreams are the unconscious announcing the necessity of solitude. The landscapes are the psyche itself, stripped of distraction, presenting itself in its barren but majestic form. And the shadowy figure is the self calling from within, urging the dreamer to stop fleeing. In waking life, this appears as loneliness. But in truth, it is a summons to initiation. The strength that arises in such hours is unlike any worldly strength. It is not the strength of dominating others, nor the strength of endless productivity, nor the strength of charming the crowd. It is an inner solidity, a rootedness in one's own being. The empath learns to say, I exist even if no one sees me. I am real even if no one thanks me. I am alive even if no one leans upon me. That realization is shattering, for it cuts the cords of dependency that secretly bind the empath's identity, and in that severing, the true self begins to shine, no longer dependent on being useful, no longer enslaved to being loved for one's gifts, but understand this strength cannot be manufactured artificially. You cannot read it in a book. You cannot borrow it from a teacher. You cannot mimic it from a mentor. It must be born from the furnace of your own isolation. Just as the pearl forms only because the oyster suffers an irritation in secret, just as the diamond emerges from pressure in the dark, so too the empath's rare strength is born only when loneliness presses upon them so fiercely that they can no longer escape. Then, in surrender, they discover that what they thought was emptiness is in fact the presence of the self, vast and eternal. In that moment of recognition, symbols rise. The dream may shift from barren desert to fertile garden. The ocean, once stormy, becomes calm, reflecting the stars. The shadow figure transforms into a guide, a wise old man, an anima or animus bearing gifts. These are the signs that the unconscious has been encountered, not as enemy, but as ally. Loneliness becomes not exile, but sanctuary. The empath realizes they are never truly alone, for the psyche itself is populated with figures, with archetypes, with a collective heritage of humanity. Solitude is crowded with invisible companions when one knows how to see. You see, modern culture has convinced you that loneliness is pathology, that it is to be medicated, distracted, eliminated at all costs. But from the perspective of depth psychology, loneliness is one of the most fertile states a human being can endure. It strips away illusion, it dissolves false attachments, it exposes the raw nerve of the soul, and for empaths, it is indispensable, for without it, they remain forever entangled in the projections of others, forever drained, forever identified with the role of caretaker. Only by passing through the valley of solitude do they become sovereign over their own psychic kingdom. There is danger here. Of course, the danger is despair, the temptation to believe that the emptiness is permanent, that no one will ever see you again, that the silence is proof of worthlessness. This is why myths are so crucial, for they remind us that the desert is not endless. The 40 days pass, the night eventually yields to dawn, the cave opens to the sky. Empaths must remember that their loneliness is an initiation, not a sentence. If they endure it consciously, if they engage with the dreams, the symbols, the archetypes that arise, they will find themselves transformed into beings of extraordinary resilience and wisdom. And what is this rare strength? It is the strength to feel without drowning, to love without losing oneself, to give without being enslaved. It is the strength to walk into a room full of pain and not be shattered by it, because one has already faced the abyss within. It is the strength to be alone and yet not lonely, to be unseen and yet radiant, to be abandoned and yet whole. This strength cannot be taught by society. It can only be discovered by the soul in its own solitude. This, then, is the paradox of the empath's journey. They fear loneliness more than anything. Yet, it is in loneliness that they find the very power that makes them whole. They avoid the desert, yet it is the desert that gives them the wellspring. They fear the shadow, yet it is the shadow that leads them to the self. Only in embracing what they most dread do they discover who they truly are. There is a secret rhythm in loneliness that many cannot hear because they cover it with noise, with distraction, with endless connection. Yet when the empath listens, when the silence is no longer avoided but endured, another music arises, subtle and profound. It is the music of the psyche itself, the eternal pulse of archetypes moving beneath the surface of the personal. This rhythm cannot be dictated by society's tempo, nor by the clamor of relationships. It belongs to the deeper law of the soul. And when you begin to feel it, you realize that loneliness is not emptiness, but a tuning fork, striking you into harmony with the hidden order of life. You have been conditioned to measure yourself by how much you give, how well you are received, how others respond to your sensitivity. That is why, when solitude arrives, it feels like annihilation. The empath believes, if no one is there to need me, do I exist at all? This is the cry of the orphan archetype, the wound of abandonment that lives in the collective unconscious. It is as if the child within you stands at the edge of the village, looking in, waiting for recognition, and when it does not come, the child believes they are invisible. Yet, in the initiation of loneliness, this child learns something astonishing. I do not need to be seen by the village to exist. I am seen by the self. I am held by an eternal witness within. This moment is not theoretical, it is visceral. You feel it in your body. The tightness in your chest that once cried for external affirmation slowly loosens. The restless longing that once drove you to please and to heal slowly burns out. And in the ashes, a new presence emerges. It feels like standing in a vast cathedral of silence, where the air itself acknowledges your being. You realize that you are not abandoned. You are accompanied by something greater than any human gaze. That is the self, the inner God image, the center that unites conscious and unconscious. I recall patients who wept in my consulting room, confessing that their loneliness was unbearable. One woman dreamt repeatedly of being trapped in a glass dome under the night sky, seeing the stars but unable to touch them. Another saw herself wandering through a house with endless empty rooms, calling names into the echo. These images revealed that the psyche was demanding recognition of solitude. When she finally accepted that the glass dome was not a prison but a protective womb, she discovered that the stars were not unreachable, but waiting for her to see their symbolic light. In time, her loneliness transfigured into a sacred solitude. That is the alchemy, the shift from despair into inner communion. The danger, of course, is when loneliness is resisted. Then it curdles into bitterness, depression, or addiction. The empath who refuses to enter solitude will seek endless substitutes, toxic relationships, compulsive caretaking, distractions that drain. They will keep giving until they collapse, all in order to avoid meeting themselves. But life, in its mysterious wisdom, often intervenes. People leave, circumstances change, friendship dissolve. What seems like tragedy is in fact the psyche forcing the empath into the necessary wilderness, for only in the wilderness can the soul find its own fire. Imagine loneliness not as exile but as pilgrimage. The pilgrim leaves the city not to be punished, but to find the holy site. The road is empty, yes, but every step is full of meaning. The empath, walking alone, begins to notice signs in the dust, symbols in the wind, voices in the dreams that visit them at night. They realize they are being guided by something older than themselves. Loneliness becomes a sacred teacher. The desert blooms with hidden oases. And what is the strength that is born here? It is the strength of boundaries. Without solitude, the empath remains porous, forever absorbing, forever open. But in loneliness, they learn to close the gates, to draw the circle, to declare, here I end. There you begin. This is not selfishness. It is sacred order. The self demands a vessel strong enough to contain its power, and boundaries are that vessel. Thus, loneliness teaches empaths to honor their own energy, to recognize their own needs, to protect their inner flame. Once boundaries are forged in solitude, the empath can enter relationships without dissolving. They can love without losing themselves. This is why the rare strength is so misunderstood. From the outside, people may see the empath withdrawing, saying no, refusing to play the old roles. They may accuse them of becoming cold or distant, but in truth, the empath is becoming whole. They are no longer dependent on external validation. They are rooted in an inner authority. This transformation radiates an invisible power. People may not understand it, but they feel it. The empath no longer bends like a reed in every storm. They stand like an oak, quiet but unshakable. There is another gift in this solitude. Vision. When you are entangled in the noise of others, your inner sight is clouded, but in loneliness, the mist clears. The empath discovers they can see beneath appearances. They begin to discern patterns, archetypal dramas unfolding in people around them. They understand that what once felt like chaos is in fact symbolic play. Dreams intensify, synchronicities multiply, the unconscious speaks more directly. This is not madness. It is the opening of perception. Empaths who survive the crucible of loneliness often emerge as visionaries, prophets, healers who see not only with their eyes but with the soul's eye. The archetype of the wise old man or woman often appears in this stage. In dreams, a figure may come bearing counsel, a sage, a grandmother, a hooded traveler. They appear when the ego has surrendered to solitude. They represent the wisdom of the collective unconscious breaking into consciousness. These encounters strengthen the empath, reminding them that solitude is never truly empty. The psyche itself rises to meet them with guidance. Many mystics throughout history have described this. They went into solitude and were visited by angels, spirits, gods. Psychology recognizes these as archetypal manifestations of the self, companions on the road of individuation. This is why I often say, do not flee loneliness. Stay with it, dialogue with it, dream with it. Ask it what it wants to show you. Behind its cold mask is a hidden treasure. The alchemists knew this. They spoke of the lapis, the philosopher's stone, hidden in the dark earth. You must dig through solitude to find it. The empath's rare strength is precisely this lapis, a solidity of being that cannot be stolen, a wholeness that cannot be broken. You may still ache for companionship, and that is natural. Humans are not made to live forever in isolation. But when you return from solitude, you return different. You are no longer hungry for scraps of recognition. You are no longer enslaved by the need to be needed. You can give freely because you have drunk from your own well. You can stand among others but not be lost. And strangely, people sense this. They are drawn to your presence, not because you fill their emptiness, but because you radiate from fullness. This is the paradox. By embracing loneliness, you become truly able to connect. Consider again the myth of the shaman. After initiation in solitude, he returns to the tribe with powers that astonish. He can heal, he can see beyond, he can guide, but these gifts are possible only because he endured the lonely trials. The empath, too, becomes a kind of shaman. They return from their exile with the strength to transform pain into wisdom. They are no longer crushed by the sorrows of others because they have confronted their own. They can hold space for suffering without drowning. That is the rare strength, the hidden crown. So, when loneliness comes, do not curse it. Do not numb it. Recognize it as the hand of the self pressing upon you. Accept its summons. Enter the desert willingly. Walk through the silent corridors of your own soul. Yes, there will be nights of despair, mornings of emptiness. But if you persist, if you trust the process, you will find the inner flame. And once that flame is lit, it will never go out. That flame is your own eternal presence, the indestructible core of your being. It is the treasure the world cannot give you and cannot take away. Loneliness then is not your weakness. It is your initiation into strength. It is the doorway through which you meet the self. It is the crucible where your empathic gift is purified from bondage into freedom. Only in loneliness do you discover that you are not merely a mirror for others. You are a sun in your own right. And when you shine from that center, your light no longer drains you. It renews you. That is the rare strength, the hidden power that empaths discover only in their solitude. And yet, the path of loneliness is not a straight ascent. It is a spiral, drawing you deeper into yourself, circling around wounds you thought were long buried. For the empath, this spiral often reveals the shadow in its darkest form. The shadow is not merely darkness, it is all that you have refused to acknowledge in yourself, all that you have projected onto others. When you are alone, stripped of distractions, these disowned parts return to you. They come in dreams as figures who chase you, in waking life as restlessness or rage, in subtle moods that feel alien. But they are not intruders. They are your own rejected children, demanding recognition. The strength of loneliness is not discovered by escaping the shadow, but by embracing it. This is the terrifying task for the empath, whose identity has been bound to kindness, to light, to selflessness. The shadow appears as selfishness, as cruelty, as rage. At first, it feels unbearable. How can I, who feel so much, harbor such darkness? Yet this is the paradox of the psyche. The more you deny your own darkness, the more it seeks expression in hidden, destructive ways. In solitude, there is no one else to blame. No external conflict to distract. You meet yourself in raw form, and only then can integration begin. I recall a dream shared by a young man who considered himself profoundly empathic. In the dream, he was walking through a dense forest at night, clutching a lantern. Suddenly, he encountered a wolf whose eyes glowed with menace. He ran, terrified, dropping the lantern until he fell to his knees. When he turned back, the wolf stood before him, no longer attacking, but waiting. He realized in that moment that the wolf was not his enemy, but his own strength, his instinct, his capacity to defend his boundaries. The dream had forced him to confront what he had always denied, his aggression, his power. In waking life, he began to honor this shadow, to set boundaries, to say no. His loneliness had been the stage upon which the shadow could reveal its gift. Empaths often believe they must always be soft, always receptive, always forgiving. But the archetypes within them tell another story. There's also the warrior, the trickster, the destroyer. These are not evil forces. They are essential for wholeness. Loneliness allows these figures to rise, to speak, to be acknowledged. Without solitude, the empath would remain trapped in a single archetype, the healer, and thus become one-sided, imbalance. In Jungian psychology, individuation requires that all archetypes be given a place at the table. Loneliness is the banquet hall where this meeting can occur. But I must caution you, the descent into shadow during loneliness can be overwhelming. Many fall into despair because they mistake the confrontation with shadow for the end of their worth. They believe, if such darkness lives within me, then I am unworthy of love. This is the ego's error. The shadow is not proof of your unworthiness, it is proof of your humanity. To see it is not to be destroyed, but to be enlarged, for when you embrace the shadow, you gain access to its energy, its vitality, its rough power. This is the true rare strength. The empath who can feel deeply without denying their own darkness becomes unshakable. They are no longer drained by others because they no longer drain themselves in denial. They stand rooted in the totality of their being. This strength is not loud. It does not boast. It moves with quiet authority. It is the authority of someone who has walked through their own abyss and emerged alive. The empath who has faced loneliness and shadow is like tempered steel, hardened by fire, but flexible, resilient. They are no longer terrified of abandonment because they have befriended their solitude. They are no longer terrified of rejection because they have accepted themselves in their entirety. Such a person radiates a presence that cannot be shaken by the storms of life. Dreams in this stage often show images of union, a wedding, a merging of opposites, a house finally lit with warmth after long darkness. These are symbols of integration, of the conscious and unconscious finding reconciliation. In myth, this is the sacred marriage, the conjunctio, the alchemical union of opposites. Loneliness becomes the altar upon which this marriage is consummated. And from this union, a new personality is born, one that is not enslaved by archetypes, but guided by the self. The empath who discovers this rare strength is no longer naive. They are no longer seduced by every cry for help, no longer trapped by every manipulator. They see clearly, with the vision that only solitude could grant. They can still love, still heal, but they do so from choice, not compulsion. Their giving is no longer self-erasure, but self-expression. And because they have faced their own shadow, they can help others face theirs without judgment, without fear. This is why I call loneliness a sacred initiation. It is not an error to be corrected, but a right to be endured. And like all rights, it has stages: separation, descent, confrontation, integration, return. Empaths who walk this path return to the world, not broken but whole, carrying a medicine that others desperately need. Their presence becomes healing, not because they absorb others' pain, but because they embody the strength of one who has faced the soul's truth. Consider how many of our world's great figures endured profound loneliness. Nietzsche wrote of walking alone in the mountains, confronting thoughts that shattered him. Teresa of Avila endured long nights of spiritual dryness, yet discovered ecstasy in them. Rainer Maria Rilke spoke of solitude as vast and dangerous, but ultimately the source of poetry. These individuals did not flee loneliness. They cultivated it as a soil for revelation. So too must the empaths learn that their solitude is not a void but a womb It is in loneliness that the archetype of the child also appears, not the wounded orphan, but the divine child, symbol of renewal, of potential, of a future yet to be born after the shadow is faced. The child arises in dreams and visions, representing a new beginning, a new self. The empath realizes that their loneliness has given birth to a new identity, one that is not a mask, but an authentic expression of the soul. This child grows into a figure of great vitality, symbolizing that loneliness has fulfilled its purpose. When you walk through this journey, you discover that loneliness is not an accident that visits you sporadically. It is part of your destiny as an empath. It will come again and again, sometimes gently, sometimes with ferocity, always to remind you that your power does not lie in others' recognition, but in your own soul's depth. And each time you accept it, each time you surrender to its teaching, you emerge more whole, more radiant, more unshakable. Do not think of loneliness as a punishment. Think of it as the self calling you home. Think of it as the unconscious arranging conditions for your transformation. Think of it as the archetypes gathering in your inner sanctuary, waiting for you to acknowledge them. And when you do, when you bow before this sacred solitude, you discover strength that nothing in the external world can grant you. That strength is the treasure hidden in the darkness. That is the rare jewel empaths discover only in their loneliness. And so we come to the final movement of this inner symphony, where what has been broken is mended, and what was once feared becomes the very source of radiance. The empath who has endured loneliness, who has passed through the valley of shadows, who has confronted the archetypes and heard the whispers of the unconscious, does not return to the world as the same fragile soul who once trembled at abandonment. They return as one who carries the invisible crown of authenticity, a presence that does not demand attention, but commands it by its quiet force. Loneliness has forged a strength that does not glitter but endures. It is not the brittle strength of pride, nor the rigid strength of denial. It is supple, like the strength of a tree that bends in the storm, yet does not break. It is the strength of one who knows they can stand alone if they must, who can walk into silence and not collapse, who can sit in darkness and not be consumed. That knowledge cannot be given. It can only be lived, and once it has been lived, no circumstance, no reaction, no betrayal can take it away. The empath who once absorbed every wound now carries a vessel deep enough to hold both their own sorrow and the sorrow of others without confusion. They can say, "This is mine, and this is yours," without guilt. They can walk beside the suffering without being devoured, because they have discovered the eternal wellspring within themselves. Their love no longer comes from hunger, but from fullness. No longer from fear, but from freedom. This is the essence of the rare strength, to love as a sovereign, not as a slave. This transformation has always been symbolized by return. In myth, the hero leaves the world, descends into the underworld, into the trials, finds the treasure, and returns to the community, bearing the boon. So too, with the empath, they leave, often unwillingly, into the exile of loneliness. They descend, facing their shadow, their despair, their orphaned child. Within they endure, resisting the temptation to numb themselves or run away, and in that endurance they discover the treasure of the self. Then they return, not to withdraw forever, but to bring back what they have found to others. But here is the paradox. Once you have endured loneliness, you no longer fear it. You no longer seek compulsively to avoid it. You recognize it as a companion, a sacred rhythm in your life. It will visit again, but now you greet it not as an enemy, but as an old teacher. You know that in its silence lies another lesson, another integration, another deepening of your strength. This changes everything. For when you are no longer enslaved by fear of loneliness, you are free, free to stay, free to leave, free to give, free to hold back, free to walk your path without clinging. That freedom is the soul's greatest gift. Dreams after this transformation often carry images of light, of vast landscapes filled with color, of bridges built over once impassable chasms. The psyche announces its integration through these symbols, and life too responds. The empath discovers that relationships shift, that those who once drained them fall away, that new connections arise, connections that honor their boundaries, that resonate with their authenticity. It is not that life becomes free of pain, but that pain is no longer unbearable. It is carried with dignity, with meaning, with strength. I must emphasize, this is not a fantasy. It is a reality I have seen in countless lives, in the dreams of patients, in the myths of cultures, in the unfolding of my own soul. Loneliness, when endured consciously, transforms empaths from fragile vessels into beings of profound resilience and luminous presence. What seems like exile is in truth initiation. What seems like emptiness is in truth the ground of fullness. What seems like weakness is in truth the birthplace of rare strength. When you next find yourself alone, when silence weighs upon you, when no one calls your name, remember this: you are standing at the threshold of initiation. Do not rush to escape. Sit with it. Feel the ache. Listen to the whispers of the unconscious. Watch your dreams. Let the archetypes visit you. Trust that beneath the despair lies the treasure. In time, you will feel it. The flame that does not depend on others. The flame that belongs to you alone. The flame that is the self. That flame is your crown, your anchor, your eternal companion. Empaths are often told their sensitivity is weakness, but in truth, it is their path to greatness. Loneliness is the forge that turns sensitivity into strength, that turns fragility into resilience, that turns dependence into sovereignty. Do not despise your loneliness, for it is the secret doorway into the wholeness you have always longed for. Through it you will discover that you are not merely an echo of others, you are the voice of your own soul. And when you live from that voice, you become not only whole for yourself, but a beacon for others. You show by your presence that it is possible to endure solitude and find treasure within it. You guide others who fear the silence into the mystery of their own depths. You become, without even intending it, a living myth, the one who walked into the wilderness and returned with the light. So I say to you now, as if whispering into the innermost chamber of your heart, do not fear loneliness, do not curse it, Do not run from it. It is your initiation, your crucible, your sacred passage. Embrace it, endure it, let it teach you, and when the time is right, you will rise from it, carrying the rare strength that belongs to no one else but you. The strength to be whole, to be sovereign, to be free. The strength to love without chains. The strength to stand, even in the silence, as one who knows they are never truly alone. This is the gift of loneliness. This is the rare strength of the empath. This is the secret hidden in the depths of the soul